In the late 17th century, as Britain's maritime routes were increasingly strained by audacious raids, a man emerged whose name would soon become synonymous with unprecedented daring and immense wealth: Henry Avery. Before his notorious rise, he was merely the first mate on the ship Charles II, tasked with evacuating Spanish treasures. But in May 1694, with months of back pay owed and unbearable conditions on board, Avery led a mutiny. He seized the vessel, renamed it Fancy, hoisted the Jolly Roger, and set course for the Red Sea, leaving old obligations behind. There, in 1695, he executed a raid that shocked the world. His target was the wealthiest ship of the Mughal Empire, the Ganj-i-Sawai. The capture of this vessel brought Avery and his crew treasures estimated at hundreds of thousands of pounds sterling, an astronomical sum for the time. He instantly became the most wanted man in the world, with a massive bounty on his head. The press dubbed him the King of Pirates, and legends sprang up about his audacity and luck. And this is where the greatest deception begins. After the Ganj-i-Sawai raid, Henry Avery seemed to vanish into thin air. Popular lore, fueled by ballads and newspaper articles, claimed he had returned to England or even Madagascar, living in luxury, awash in gold, enjoying a comfortable old age. This story became the basis for countless legends, inspiring generations of dreamers and adventurers. But reality, as is often the case, is far more prosaic and much more brutal. The legend of the pirate who retired with untold riches is merely an artful veil designed to conceal the true fate of a man who dared to defy empires. The real end of Henry Avery was not a golden sunset, but a gritty, unvarnished truth that remains overshadowed by his grand scheme. Before Henry Avery became the world-renowned king of pirates, he was just one of millions of sailors abandoned to the mercy of a brutal era. The 17th century for a sailor was not about romantic voyages, but an unrelenting hell. Life aboard any vessel, whether merchant or warship, was a continuous struggle for survival. Discipline was savage, punishments atrocious, and hygiene non-existent. Scurvy, dysentery, and typhoid decimated crews faster than any battle. Lice, rats, rotting salted meat, and fresh water teeming with worms were daily realities. A sailor constantly teetered on the brink of starvation and disease, and the prospect of being thrown overboard for any transgression was not an idle threat, but a harsh truth. Henry Avery, like many others, did not choose his fate. He was drawn into a world where human life was cheaper than a barrel of rum. Delays in wages for months, even years, were not exceptions, but the norm. Governments and ship owners systematically cheated sailors, leaving them destitute and condemning their families to poverty. Imagine a man who risked his life daily, survived in inhuman conditions, and ultimately received nothing of what was promised. Year after year, month after month. This bred profound despair, a sense of utter powerlessness, and fierce hatred for the system that created it. It was in such an environment that Henry Avery's character was forged. He was not merely an adventurer seeking easy riches, he was a product of a broken, rotten system. Every delayed wage, every humiliating beating, every comrade who died of hunger or disease, all of this imprinted itself on his mind, creating a kind of psychological trauma. It wasn't one point of no return, but a series of micro-traumas that gradually eroded his loyalty and belief in justice. By the time he found himself aboard the Charles II, where the situation with unpaid wages had become unbearable, Avery was no longer just a sailor, but a man pushed to his limits. He saw that legal avenues offered no recourse, that his life and labor meant nothing to those in power. And then he understood, if the system wouldn't protect him, he had to protect himself, by his own rules. By raising a mutiny, Avery didn't just seize a ship, he broke his chains and made a choice that was inevitable for a man with his experiences. This was not an act of thoughtless rebellion, but a calculated decision by a desperate yet incredibly shrewd man who understood perfectly that he had nothing left to lose. His subsequent audacity, his fearlessness, and his incredible luck were not coincidences, but a direct consequence of this internal transformation. He didn't just become a pirate, he became a symbol of retribution, an embodiment of the rage of all humiliated and wronged sailors whom the system had denied the most basic right, the right to a dignified life. And it was this psychological foundation, built on despair and determination, that made him the most successful and elusive pirate of his time, transforming him into a living legend long before his true fate became shrouded in mystery. However, the story of Henry Avery is not just a saga of a rebel and his unprecedented success. It is a mirror of an era, reflecting a world where the boundaries of law were blurred and the Crown's authority extended only as far as its gunpowder and cannons allowed. The 17th century, at whose close Avery raised his flag, was a time of colossal change, yet also of profound contradictions, creating the ideal fertile ground for such figures. The political landscape of Europe resembled a boiling cauldron. England, France, Spain, and the Netherlands were engaged in a continuous struggle for global dominance, their rivalry unfolding not only on battlefields, but across the vast oceans. Colonial empires expanded rapidly, and with them, the importance of maritime trade routes grew. Crowns were preoccupied with endless wars. For instance, the War of the Grand Alliance, known in England as the 9 Years' War, consumed enormous resources, draining state treasuries. In these conditions, the Navy, though vital, often found itself in a deplorable state, and its presence in distant corners of the world was severely limited. This created a power vacuum, which was eagerly filled by those who recognized no laws. Moreover, governments themselves actively used privateers. Captains issued letters of marque to capture enemy vessels. The line between privateering and piracy became almost indistinguishable, if not by the letter of the law, then by the nature of the actions. Yesterday's hero could become tomorrow's most wanted criminal, depending on political expediency. No one was eager to spend scarce resources chasing pirates unless it directly affected the interests of the Crown or influential trading companies. The global economic landscape also contributed to the flourishing of maritime robbery. This was the golden age of mercantilism, when a nation's wealth was measured by the amount of gold and silver accumulated in its treasury. Global trade was experiencing an unprecedented boom, especially in the East. The East India Companies, British, Dutch, French, became gigantic corporations, effectively states within states, controlling fabulous flows of spices, silk, precious stones, and metals from India, China, and other Asian countries. These goods were transported on slow, overloaded vessels, which were easy prey for audacious raiders. The absence of developed banking systems and secure electronic transfer methods meant that colossal fortunes traveled across oceans in the form of physical gold, silver, and jewels. A ship like the Ganj-i-Sawai was not just a vessel, but a floating bank, a treasure trove whose capture could instantly make anyone rich who dared to attempt it. This created incredible incentives for risk and went far beyond ordinary robbery. Finally, the social atmosphere was permeated with discontent and the search for a better life. For most of Europe's population, life was hard, full of deprivation and limitations. The sea offered one of the few chances to escape poverty, but as we have seen, conditions on ships were unbearable. However, it was precisely this despair, combined with the possibility of instant wealth, that pushed thousands into the embrace of maritime adventure. Society, especially its poorer strata, often sympathized with pirates, seeing them not just as criminals, but as a kind of Robin Hoods or Avengers, defying the rich and powerful. The spread of printed materials, newspapers, pamphlets, ballads, instantly carried news of daring raids, transforming pirates into folk heroes or sinister villains. These stories, often embellished and mythologized, fueled the public imagination and shaped the image of the king of pirates long before his true fate became a matter of dispute. Thus Henry Avery did not simply appear on the scene, he was a product of his time, born from global political intrigues, economic realities, and social sentiments that collectively created the ideal conditions for his unprecedented rise and the grand deception that followed. After Henry Avery mutinied on the Charles II and renamed it the Fancy, he didn't merely embark on a random treasure hunt. His very first major move was not just a robbery, but a bold strategic operation that shook the foundations of maritime trade and triggered a global diplomatic crisis. Avery's target was not an ordinary merchant convoy, but a Mughal fleet sailing from Mecca to Surat, carrying pilgrims and fabulous riches. In September 1695, in the Arabian Sea, the Fancy and several other pirate ships that had joined him tracked and attacked this convoy. The main prize was the Ganj-i-Sawai, the Mughal flagship, a gigantic vessel with 80 cannons and 400 muskets on board, carrying unimaginable treasures, gold, silver, jewels, and silks, valued at hundreds of millions of dollars in today's money. The capture of the Ganj-i-Sawai was not just luck, but a demonstration of unprecedented audacity and shrewdness. Avery understood that striking the Mughals was striking at the very heart of the British East India Company, which depended on good relations with Indian authorities. This was not merely theft, it was an act of economic terrorism designed to maximally destabilize the system that, in his view, had betrayed him. After the treasures were transferred and the Ganj-i-Sawai plundered and abandoned, Avery and his now fabulously wealthy crew faced a new dilemma: how to keep their loot and disappear without a trace. This is where the greatest mystification begins, the second and perhaps most grandiose scheme of Henry Avery. He understood that remaining in the Red Sea or returning to known ports meant certain death. The whole world was looking for him. Instead of settling in one place, Avery began a series of meticulously planned maneuvers designed to confuse his pursuers and create a smokescreen around his true fate. The Fancy set course for the Bahamas, where part of the crew, having received their share, disembarked, scattering across the Caribbean. This was just the beginning of a cunning plan. Avery himself, according to rumors, sold the ship in Nassau, and then, on another vessel, sailed to Dublin, Ireland. He didn't just disappear, he dissolved, leaving behind only fragments of contradictory evidence. This disappearance hoax was masterfully executed. Through intermediaries and scattered rumors, Avery began to shape his own myth. Stories of his return to England with untold riches, of living in luxury, of his mysterious retirement. All of this was not spontaneous folk legend. It was, as we now understand, a deliberate disinformation campaign designed to divert attention from his real situation and make the world believe in a fairy tale. The goal was simple. The more people believed in his comfortable existence somewhere on a treasure island, the fewer resources would be expended on his actual search. He didn't just evade justice, he deceived history itself, transforming his escape into a legend that overshadowed the unvarnished truth. And this grand veil of fiction proved so dense that for centuries it concealed the true and far more brutal end of the King of Pirates. However, this masterfully woven veil of fiction was necessary because Henry Avery, whether unknowingly or perhaps consciously, had made enemies whose scale surpassed any pirate's imagination. His audacity challenged not merely merchant ships, but powerful empires and their financial pillars, forcing those who had previously turned a blind eye to piracy to take active measures. The primary beneficiary of his capture, and essentially the main antagonist in this global game, was the British East India Company, whose fate hung in the balance because of one audacious pirate. This corporation, effectively a state within a state, controlled vast flows of wealth from India and other Asian countries. Its prosperity, its monopolistic position in the East, depended on fragile diplomatic relations with the Mughal Empire, one of the most powerful states of that time. When Henry Avery attacked and plundered the Ganj-i-Sawai, he struck not just a merchant vessel. He inflicted a direct insult upon Emperor Aurangzeb himself, whose name commanded awe from Delhi to London. The Ganj-i-Sawai was not just a ship. It carried thousands of Muslim pilgrims returning from Mecca and belonged personally to the imperial court. This was not merely robbery, it was an act of sacrilege and a direct challenge to Mughal sovereignty. Aurangzeb's reaction was immediate and furious. The enraged emperor immediately ordered the arrest of all British subjects in Surat, including high-ranking officials of the East India Company. He threatened to expel the English entirely from India, confiscate all their possessions, and permanently ban trade. For the British East India Company, this meant imminent collapse. Its multi-million-pound investments, decades of effort to establish trade relations, its entire colossal business was suddenly threatened with complete destruction. The company, accustomed to dictating terms, now found itself in the position of a helpless victim whose future depended on the capture of one man. The pressure on the British crown became immense. London, in the person of King William III, faced an unprecedented diplomatic crisis. The loss of Indian trade routes would mean not only financial catastrophe, but also a severe weakening of England's position on the world stage. The king, already embroiled in the costly 9 Years' War against France, could not afford an economic war with the Mughals as well. Henry Avery, from an audacious pirate, had transformed into a threat to national security. London's response was unprecedented in its scale. A royal proclamation declared Avery and his crew enemies of mankind, a term usually applied to pirates, but in this case backed by real political will. An unprecedented bounty was placed on Avery's head, £1,000 sterling, a sum that at the time could buy several ships or secure a comfortable existence for several generations. This was the largest reward ever offered for the capture of a single criminal. Moreover, the Crown offered a general amnesty to all pirates who surrendered, with the sole exception of Henry Avery and his accomplices from the Fancy. This step underscored the exceptional nature of his crime and the authorities' desperate desire to capture him specifically at any cost. Throughout the British Empire, from the Caribbean Sea to the Indian Ocean, orders for his capture were dispatched. The hunt for Henry Avery became a priority for the Royal Navy and the East India Company's agents. Every port, every colony received clear instructions: find, capture, and deliver the King of Pirates. This was not just a pursuit of a criminal, it was a global operation to save a multi-billion-dollar enterprise and restore diplomatic prestige. It was these powerful forces, which Avery himself had awakened, that became his main antagonists, transforming his disappearance from